it is obvious to me that Jorge Masvidal is a star. I mean, apparently, Jorge Masvidal versus Kamaru Usman, the pay-per-view buys were 1.3 million pay-per-view buys. So 1.3 million people purchased this pay-per-view, UFC 251, according to a report by The Athletic. Everyone is reporting on this. And apparently this is the highest pay-per-view event, the most buys a pay-per-view in the UFC has gotten since Conor McGregor's fight with Khabib, which was UFC 229. And of course, that makes sense because Conor McGregor and Khabib, that was a fight that everybody wanted to see. So many people wanted to see that fight. So it's understandable why that's like the record holder when it comes to pay-per-view. But this lets me know right here that Jorge Masvidal is definitely a guy that has a lot of drawing power. I think this is a guy that could basically fight anybody, and he would, and a lot of people will come to watch that fight. A lot of people will buy that fight because that the reason this pay-per-view got that many buys was because he was in the card. And no offense to Kamaru Usman, but we all know that Kamaru Usman is not a draw like that. I don't think he's not really a fan favorite style. But Jorge Masvidal, it's crazy how he made, last year was the best year for Jorge Masvidal's career. He made a really big name for himself by beating Darren Till, by destroying Ben Askren, and by beating Nate Diaz. Although that fight was controversial because, obviously the doctor stopped it in the start of the fourth round. I would have loved it if it went the distance. We would have got a proper decision. But last year, Jorge Masvidal really made a name for himself because, prior to last year, Jorge Masvidal had not fought since losing to Stephen Thompson, which was 3 years ago, back in 2017. So it's crazy how a guy could come back after taking nearly a 2-year layoff, and then have these three, fights in a row in last year, 2019, and then grow a massive fan base, because that's what he's done. He's literally grown a massive fan base. So now I see why, because a lot of people are saying, I saw Chanel's son, and he said that even if Jorge Masvidal were to lose to Kamaru Usman, he could still come back and fight somebody like Colby Covington, because he's still a draw. People would still want to see him fight. And now I see what they're talking about. There's so many fights out there for Jorge Masvidal, although he lost, which is no shame. Kamaru Usman is the welterweight champion for a reason, right? There's a reason why he hasn't lost in 15 fights, because he's a quality wrestler. He's a really good, high quality, high caliber wrestler. If he wasn't, he would have lost several times. But there's so many options out there for Jorge Masvidal. He could have that rematch with Nate Diaz, right? That's a fight that people want to see, because people felt that, the doctor basically ruined it by stopping the fight because Nate Diaz had a cut, right? He could have that rematch with Nate Diaz. He could have that. I want to see him fight Colby Covington. All right, I want to see that fight. Although he said, Masvidal say, there's no point in fighting him. I want to see, there is a point in fighting him. I want to see him fight him. Shoot, even if, let's say they have Gilbert Burns when he gets cleared of, COVID-19 and he eventually fights Kamaru Usman. If he loses against Kamaru Usman, I would want to see him fight, what's his name? Gilbert Burns. So there's so many options out there for Jorge Masvidal. It's really impressive that a guy could come off it, because this guy literally was not active for 2 years, right? He had, like I said, in 2017, he lost, and then he did not fight until he came back in early 2019 against, Darren Till, when he fought him over there in London. So it's very impressive to see how a guy could really gain all this support and new fans from the UFC just by having such a great year like Jorge Masvidal had last year. And now he's one of those guys that He's like a Nate Diaz. Every time Nate Diaz fights someone, people show up. People pay to see because Nate Diaz, he has this thing about him that he draws people to watch his fights. That he could fight anybody and he'll still probably do good numbers. I think Jorge Masvidal has that type of vibe. You could tell a lot of people like his style. It's understandable. He's an exciting fighter. Obviously, against Kamaru Usman, it wasn't an exciting fight, but that was because styles make fights. But, if Jorge Masvidal is in there with a guy who's willing to stand toe-to-toe with him and they're going to strike at each other, that's going to be an entertaining fight. Somebody's going to get either seriously hurt or seriously knocked out. So, that just goes to show you Jorge Masvidal is definitely a star when it comes to UFC fighters. He's definitely one of those stars. And, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. I'm out.